So yeah, I look at the musicians that I tend to try and like learn about the musicians who I write for, and then kind of imagine what would sound best.
Welkom bij deze extra podcastaflevering van Vlak voor de Gong. Vandaag wijken we een beetje af van het gewone stramien, want we moeten het hebben over Ear to the Ground. Op zaterdag 7 december 2024 is de Bijloke site opnieuw het schouwtoneel voor de meest avontuurlijke muziek van het moment. En een belangrijk deel van het programma is de muziek van de Duitse saxofoniste en componiste Ingrid Laubrock. Ik kon even met haar praten om het te hebben over haar muziek, haar visie op improviseren en componeren en over de 3 voorstellingen waarbij je haar muziek kan ontdekken op Ear to the Ground. Veel luisterplezier.
It's fantastic that I get the opportunity to talk to you. Because you're, of course, our focus artist on the next Ear to the Ground festival. You are one of the most visionary improvisers. That's not even my words, but Jason Moran's. How did you discover this kind of music?
I think for me, it was really one thing leading to another. I always learned on the job, as people used to say it. Like I learned a lot from Brazilian music. I played more traditional jazz, a lot of standards. I learned kind of from transcribing many of the great American jazz players, etc. So I kind of went through different types of music before I got curious about free improvisation. I think when I moved away from playing only standards, I started composing much more, and through composing, I got exposed and listened to a lot more different types of music, which led me to trying to find different avenues of combining composition and improvisation. And because of that, I wanted to go to see the extremes as well, which is completely free improvising. And I felt like as a saxophone player, the improvisation in jazz is really just one way of improvising. You tend to be less involved in the overall shaping of say, the hour-long set. That you have much more kind of defined moments of where you play, etc. And I wanted to see if I wanted to be more involved in shaping the overall duration of the set, if that makes sense.
What's the difference between the London music scene and the New York music scene?
In London and New York, there are some very strong voices and very strong musicians. But in New York, everybody seems to congregate, and it's just the amount of amazing musicianship that is out there is, I think, probably unequaled anywhere else. And that there are so many jazz musicians, obviously for the States being the root of all jazz music, but there's also an incredible new music field. There are musicians from absolutely everywhere in the world who bring their own influences, and many musicians who live, say, in other parts of the world come by and stop by maybe for a year or a few months. So the scene is always changing, and it is just enormous.
How would you describe your journey? Are you still learning every day, or?
Yes, I hope I'm learning every day. I feel it is an ongoing process. And I think in my case, the fact that I kind of split my time between composing and performing, both kind of influence each other really extremely. Like when I have time by myself and I can kind of focus my thoughts and put them into composition, that will change the way I approach the rest of my music, I think, when I perform. So it keeps feeding each other. Sometimes I grow in one direction, sometimes in the other.
What also drew my attention was that you have a lot of projects. Also on Ear to the Ground, you're coming here with 3 different performances. Is that necessary for the development as an improvising musician?
I don't know if I really have that many projects. I have a few that I focus on in general, but I do produce a lot of music. Like I do write all the time when I have time. So there is a kind of a sense of when I compose, I want to get that music documented. That seems very important to me. If I spend a lot of time thinking and writing it, I would like to, if possible, release it or at least document the journey.
And I do believe you have a wide spectrum of writing, of composing. You go from the duos, for example, with Tom, or you write pieces for orchestra. Is there a different approach as a composer?
Yes, there's definitely a different approach as a composer. When I write for classical musicians, I have to just write in so much more detail than when I compose for improvisers. For improvisers, you really want to keep avenues open, and you want to keep, even if you write complex music or include complex music in the for improvisers, you do want to leave a certain openness so that they can bring their own voice to it. And as improvisers or jazz musicians, we tend to color the music the way we like, much more than classical musicians. Classical musicians are used to reading so much detail, which we are not. It's just a difference in training. The other thing I think is the time feel. Like obviously, if I'm composing for somebody like Tom, who's a jazz musician, I will not write. I will bear in mind that his time feel and the syncopation that is included in jazz and is actually a main part of jazz is also included in the writing. So yeah, I look at the musicians that I tend to try and like learn about the musicians who I write for, if I already know them, and then kind of imagine what would sound best
in your oeuvre. The same, and that's of course why you're our focus artist this year. It's Ear to the Ground. The festival is borderless. It shows jazz, it shows improvised music, it shows contemporary classical music, if you should give it a name. I have a feeling that in your career there is no border between those three genres, if I should say it so. And I think that's a tale of these times, that there are no borders between genres anymore.
Yes, I agree about that. I think that it is exactly that. I try to write what's in my head, and I try to give it to the performer in a form that they can understand and interpret it. Absolutely.
First off is the duo with Tom Rainey. You are currently on tour with him. The thing about improvised music is, of course, that I reckon on tour every night is different in one way. But an album is a time document. It's one take that you have to choose. It's one direction in the music that you have to put to record. Is that for you a starting point of future improvisations, or is it just a snippet of time that you let loose afterwards?
I mean, I don't tend to say release all my improvised records. That would be really flooding everybody. When we do, like especially with Tom and the duet, we have been core members of so many groups that play like really complex music, but also of groups that are improvised, and we have our duets. We've been playing since 2007, and he has been like super instrumental in shaping all the music that I make, or much of the composed music that I make. So when we have now recorded our 5th duo record, which is called Brink, and which we're touring right now, and that record is a mix of composition and improvisation. So we can really I can tailor the compositions to us, but we have also released, I think, one record where we improvise. Still, we could have, in the meantime, we could have released many other records, but we don't choose to. We just go for the ones that we feel like stick out. So if an improvisation was great and also recorded really well, then we might put it out. It's not necessary for me to document every single improvised gig. It's more important to me, I think, to document the music that I've composed. The compositions, yeah.
I've read in another interview that you called playing in duo a very intense conversation. You're playing with Tom since 2007, as you mentioned. Has it become easier to keep that conversation going?
I feel like we have developed like a kind of a language of our own and an understanding of our own. And Tom is probably the drummer that gets most involved in the sort of shaping of things and orchestration of things that I know. He's really wonderful at that. And he has a really sort of sixth sense, I think, as a drummer. So I think over the years, I mean, we have played so much as duets, especially in the pandemic, because in the pandemic we played together almost daily, and we just really have developed something that I think is our own identity as a group, which I'm really pleased about, especially since it's a drum saxophone duet. And it's a challenge to make that work. And I think partially this is because we have worked on music together, on harp music together. We've also played standards together, but we are totally comfortable playing completely free improvised music or so. So there is a certain range in the way we can interact with each other.
Yeah, you mentioned that sometimes it's a challenge to make the saxophone drums duet work, maybe because the saxophone is the only melody instrument in the duo. How do you approach your sets?
Yeah, I mean, we have, for example, in this new record, I have written a piece that involves a lot of multiphonics, only multiphonics, which is basically really just blocks of sound that Tom can color. So there you have a sense of polyphony and a sense of kind of movement. And I've used and I've derived those multiphonics from a pitch set that kind of finds its way through other pieces in the record. I often try and hide a sort of a connection between pieces so it doesn't feel, which you might not immediately hear, but which is there. So that, which I think this adds a sort of connecting factor, or like makes the records rounder.
Yeah, you're talking about the Brinks number 1 to 6.
No, I'm actually not talking about. Those are different kind of connectors. They're almost like stepping stones between the pieces. They're very, very short fragmented pieces. But you're right in a sense as well. So those Brinks 1 to 6, they use parts of the compositions. Not all of them, but some of them use parts of the compositions, but played with false fingering. So you can no longer really perceive the pitches. The pitches are all broken up, but the shape of the phrase remains and the rhythm of the phrase remains. So there's a certain sense of a fragmented memory of pieces that are there on the record in a longer form. But on top of that, there is a piece called Liquefied Columns, which is a multiphonics piece that Tom is just coloring. Okay, yeah. And that one uses pitches from another piece, or the multiphonics are derived from pitches of the piece.
Said being said, the final.
Said being said, yes. Yes, said being said. So said being said is a pitch set, and the Liquefied Columns, the multiphonics are based on that pitch set. Yeah. So there are little kind of subliminal kind of connections in these pieces that hopefully tie them together.
SPECTRA Ensemble is also playing your Unveiled on Ear to the Ground. Could you tell me more how the composition came to be?
Yes, Unveiled is a composition that was written for the Grossman Ensemble in Chicago. The Grossman Ensemble is, I think, organized and initiated possibly by the composer Augusta Thomas. And it is, I think, the resident ensemble of the University of Chicago, or at least that's where we performed it. And they work in an interesting way, which is a little bit more akin to the way a jazz band works. You have 3 rehearsals with them, and you travel over to Chicago 3 times. The first rehearsal, you can kind of bring in fragments, or you can bring in really, say, 50 to 60% written piece. They play through those fragments. Everything is recorded professionally, so you get a very, very clear document of those fragments, of whatever you've brought in. We worked with the conductor, Tim Weiss, who is extremely good at discussing actually with the composers. It becomes a discussion. You talk to the musicians, you talk to the conductor, then you get a chance to take it home, revise it. A month later, you go have the second rehearsal where you maybe bring in a 90% form piece, and then 2 weeks later, you come in again and bring the full version. It's a really interesting process, so the musicians have a little bit more input than they usually do in the classical world.
I've read in the liner notes, I think, that you shaped the composition while taking long hikes through Canyon Park.
Right, that's right.
So should I see that you've taken multiple walks, or did you gather the atmosphere, the information for the piece on a single trip?
That's an interesting question. No, actually, And it's also a good question. We were actually on vacation, and I wake up early, so I would take these early morning walks, and it was definitely several walks. And I think I was walking, it's a beautiful canyon in Southern California, and there were these spider webs that were completely full of dewdrops, and these like funneled spiders, so they have like a little black hole in the center, and dewdrops. Basically, these spider webs had very interesting shapes. I took a lot of photos of them, which almost served as a reminder later when I created the piece. But on these walks, I would try and like have the piece kind of appear, gradually sort of clarify. This is something I do quite often. Like I take little notes and write down little fragments, but I also wait until I hear maybe a curve or a timeline of a piece, or see what might happen within the piece, and it kind of crystallizes in my head before I start writing it.
And then those long walks, of course, are ideal to
because
take the time to crystallize.
Exactly, because you don't, you're really with your thoughts, and you really there's no distractions. It was quiet, it was beautiful. I find nature quite helpful that way.
We covered 2 of the 3 performances on Ear to the Ground. There's a final one, a Monochromes. When you put it to record, it's a 40-minute composition, but it's more an installation with live musicians. Am I correct?
Yes. The way I always envisage these monochromes is that they're kind of sound panels. So 10-minute long tape pieces that the musicians play with, and they could potentially be played in any order. The catalog of sound panels could grow into more than the 4 that I have right now. And these are connected with improvisations of the musicians.
When did the idea start to combine taped music and live musicians?
It really is an idea that I've had for a long time. I've always wanted to create these kind of sound mass pieces that are just really big and enveloping, and to have this kind of feeling of being completely in the thick of a forest of sound, or of like a big sound mass as an improviser. It really came to fruition in 2020. I started putting everything together. No, I think I wrote the first Monochromes, which is really a through-written piece for 29 trumpets. I wrote that in 2019 and then started recording it in 2020. I managed to record all the audio files for the monochrome pieces in 2020, just before the pandemic hit. So that was actually kind of a good time to be able to deal with putting the whole piece together. Because once I had the audio files for it, I didn't need to go into the studio with musicians anymore, which of course we couldn't at the time. So 2020 was, we edited this together, and then 2021, when there was a window just before Omicron hit, I guess, there was a performance of it at the Vision Fest in New York.
I'm never going to say that the pandemic was a good time, but the fact that that when people were able to come together again, that then you could present a piece that was both something that you created on your own when the pandemic was, when you were locked in, and something you could create with other people because we were free again for a while. It's a time document of that period, of course.
Absolutely, and it was powerful.
Do you still think about that moment in time when you're performing it now, or is that gone? It's more the general idea of Monochromes that it's.
This will be the first performance. So we recorded this at the Vision Fest. Then I recorded it. We made the record Monochromes in the studio the year after. By that time, I had added a last piece to it, which is the percussion instruments of Harry Batoya, the Sonambient sculptures, which is a really fabulous set of, I think he made 100 sculptures. Harry Batoya was a furniture designer, but he also made incredible sound sculptures. And he had a barn in Pennsylvania where he would record and play those sound sculptures. And I had a chance to record those sculptures in the National Museum in Dallas, Texas, where the Shifting Foundation organized a 6-day event where different musicians would play on these sculptures. It was people like Craig Taborn and Chris Davis, Ben Monder and Nels Klein, Jen Shu and Brandon Seabrook, and I performed with J.D. Allen together. There were others I just can't. Oh, Nate Woolley and Ambrose Akinmusir. It was a really fabulous week of concerts. And I came in a day earlier and went to the exhibition room and recorded the last panel of Monochromes. So for me, it was a special occasion. So after I recorded that, we went to the studio in New York and strung the whole thing together and made a studio recording of the whole piece, Monochromes. So at Ear to the Ground, this will actually only be the second time the whole piece is going to be performed live.
Okay, very much looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too.
To the entire day, to the entire festival. I think it's going to be very, very, very interesting. Ear to the Ground is a very interesting festival because you have all these kinds of music coming together. I'm really looking forward to seeing you there with the duo with Unveiled, with SPECTRA Ensemble, and then the Monochromes installation. Thank you for taking the time for this conversation.
Yes. I mean, I just wanted to say that I'm really honored to be asked to be so present at Ear to the Ground Festival. It's really special. I've played there a few years ago with Unveiled, and I loved it. I loved the whole setting, and I love what you do.
Thank you as well. And see you the 7th of December.
Great. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ingrid Laubrock zie je dus in drievoud op Ear to the Ground, maar ook de rest van het programma is om van te smullen. Marlies de Bakker, Jessie Cox, Joachim Badehorst, Robert Landverman, Microtub, om er maar een paar te noemen, ze brengen allemaal muziek op het scherp van de snee. Kom het zelf ontdekken op Ear to the Ground op zaterdag 7 december 2024. Je checkt het volledige programma op www.bijloke.be/eartotheground. Bedankt om te luisteren naar deze extra aflevering van Vlak voor de Gong. De muziek die je hoorde komt uit de albums Brink en Monochromes van Ingrid Laubrock. Volgende week zijn we terug met een normale aflevering met als gast percussionist Wim Pelgrims van het duo Goggles. Bedankt om te luisteren en tot de volgende keer.